You spit in a little plastic tube, seal it, mail it off, and forget about it by lunch. A few weeks later, a website says you're 18% Irish and have a second cousin in Ohio. Harmless fun. But that same kind of test ended a manhunt that had run for over 40 years. And the man it caught never knew a relative he'd never met had quietly given him away. For about a decade in the 1970s and 80s, a stranger terrorized California, moving town to town. Police knew the crimes were connected long before they knew they were all the work of one man. Different regions gave him different names, each department chasing what looked like its own separate case. Eventually, the pattern was undeniable. One offender, dozens of attacks, at least 13 murders. He planned. He was careful. He seemed to vanish the moment each crime was over. Then, for years, nothing new, just a case file that kept getting thicker and colder. But he'd left something he couldn't plan around, his DNA, recovered from several of the scenes. By the 1990s, labs could build a genetic profile from that evidence and prove the crimes were linked. Here's the catch. A DNA profile is only useful if you have something to match it against. The FBI runs a database called CODIS, built from the DNA of people already convicted of crimes. Investigators searched it with their profile, again and again for years. It never returned a match. It's like searching for a name in a phone book that only lists people who've been arrested. He'd never been caught, so he simply wasn't in the book. The DNA just sat there. And so the case stalled, a flawless piece of evidence with no one to compare it to. But here's where it flips. It turns out you don't need the suspect in a database at all. You just need one of his relatives, and relatives had started volunteering for fun by the millions. All over the country, ordinary people were spitting in tubes to trace their family trees. These sites compare your DNA to everyone else's and quietly flag the strangers you're related to. Because relatives share chunks of DNA, you share about half with a parent, a quarter with a grandparent. Go out to a second or third cousin and the shared piece shrinks, but it's still measurably there. Small enough to overlook at a glance, specific enough to be nearly impossible to fake. Around 2017, a small team of investigators had a quiet, almost heretical idea. What if they treated the killer's crime scene DNA like an ordinary customer hunting for cousins? They needed a database that would accept a raw profile, not just tubes mailed in by paying users. A free open site called GEDmatch let anyone upload a genetic profile and search it for matches. So they uploaded the killer's profile, disguised as just another person looking for family. The screen came back not with his name, but with a list of distant relatives. No siblings, no first cousins, just a scattering of third and fourth cousins across the country. If that just changed how you see a cheek swab, that's exactly what this channel is for. Stick around. Now picture being handed a dozen strangers and told one of their cousins is a killer. That was the puzzle. Each match shared an ancestor with him, sometimes from the early 1800s. A genealogist named Barbara rae-venter led the painstaking work of building the family trees outward. She took those distant cousins and traced their families forward, generation by generation. Census records, marriage certificates, obituaries, old newspaper clippings, the paper trail of ordinary lives. Each document added a branch, a name, a marriage, a child, slowly filling in a giant map. The goal was to find the spot where two separate family lines had once crossed and married, because a descendant sitting at that crossing point would share DNA with all of the matches. It's the reverse of what you'd expect. They didn't start with him and look for relatives. They started with relatives and closed in on him, tightening the circle one record at a time. As the tree grew, they layered on everything they already knew about the offender. He was a man. They could estimate his age from the span of years the crimes covered. They knew the regions he'd lived in, matching where the attacks had happened over time. One by one, the branches of the family that didn't fit got quietly crossed off. A man too young, a woman, someone who'd lived 3 states away the entire time. The circle kept shrinking, until it closed around a single name that fit every constraint. He was a former police officer. Decades earlier, for a while, he'd worn the badge himself. He was living quietly in a suburb near Sacramento, an aging man in an ordinary house. A neighbor would have seen a grandfather washing his car, not the target of a decades-old manhunt. Here's the thing, though. A family tree is a powerful lead, not proof. It could still be wrong. A genealogical match points at a person. It doesn't place their DNA at the scene. So they needed his actual DNA, the real thing, to compare against the crime scene profile. They couldn't simply ask for it, so they watched and waited for him to throw something away. We shed DNA constantly, on a coffee cup, a used tissue, the handle of a car door. Investigators quietly recovered an item he'd discarded and rushed it to the lab. The result was a direct match to the DNA left behind decades before. The same person. To be certain, they collected a second discarded sample. It matched too, no doubt was left. In April 2018, officers arrested him outside his home. He looked almost bewildered. The man who'd stayed a step ahead for 40 years was undone by a cousin's curiosity. 2 years later, he stood in a courtroom and pleaded guilty to 13 murders. He admitted to dozens of other attacks, many too old to charge, but confessed on the record. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The file was finally closed. Survivors and families, some of whom had waited most of their lives, watched him answer for it. Now here's the part that should sit with you. He himself was never in any database. Police never had his DNA on file. What they had was the DNA of relatives he'd never met. Your genome isn't only yours. It's a shared document, half-copied into everyone you're related to. When one cousin uploads their spit to a site, they reveal a blurry sketch of the whole family. That's the quiet trade almost nobody consciously agrees to. Your relatives can make you findable. And it cuts both ways. The same fact that catches a killer can expose anyone for anything. This approach now has a name, investigative genetic genealogy, and it's a recognized forensic tool. Since that arrest, it's helped crack dozens of cold cases everyone had long given up on. The lesson isn't to fear a spit tube. It's to understand what you're really mailing off. You're not just sending your own story, you're sending a piece of everyone who shares your blood. Recap: no suspect in any database, just distant cousins, dusty public records, and one discarded item. The killer spent 40 years hiding his fingerprints. In the end, his family tree was the fingerprint. If untangling how a case actually gets solved is your thing, subscribe. Next, we're breaking down how the first fingerprint database was born. Thanks for watching. Look a little closer at the ordinary things. They're stranger than they seem.